Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you try to read a highly emotional love poem the exact same way you'd read a dense, binding legal contract, you are going to get it completely, totally wrong, right? Well, today, we are looking at the foundational rules for interpreting ancient texts, specifically focusing on the Bible. We're going to uncover exactly why understanding the style of writing, the genre, is basically the master key to unlocking what these ancient authors actually meant and why ignoring genre literally leads to massive misunderstandings.
Here is our game plan for today. We're looking at the biblical library, decoding poetry, the punchline of parables, navigating prophetic literature, apocalyptic themes in the rapture, and finally, common pitfalls to avoid.
Okay, Section 1, the Biblical Library, Understanding Diverse Literary Forms.
To start off, we really have to recognize a fundamental truth. The Bible is not just one single, uniform book. It is a massively diverse library of literary genres compiled over centuries. Think about it like this. Almost half of it, 43%, is narrative. Another huge chunk, 33%, is poetry, and the remaining 24% is discourse. Because of this massive variety, a huge portion of the text requires very specific reading strategies. You simply cannot apply the exact same interpretive rules to a historical account of a king that you would apply to an emotional song of lament or a logical step-by-step letter. It just doesn't work.
So when we're in that massive narrative section, here is the absolute most crucial concept you gotta grasp: the difference between descriptive and prescriptive writing. Narratives primarily describe what happened. They do not necessarily prescribe that action for us. Let's be real. Just because a historical narrative records that King David had multiple wives, does that mean God commanded it? No way. Does it mean the text is recommending that behavior for anyone else? Absolutely not. It's simply descriptive history. It's laying out the unvarnished, often messy reality of human events, rather than acting as a prescriptive, step-by-step manual for your life.
Moving right along to Section 2, Decoding Poetry and Metaphors, Rhythm of Ideas.
Okay, this is where it gets super fascinating. Ancient Hebrew poetry, it doesn't rhyme sounds like we're used to in modern English. It rhymes ideas. This literary device is called parallelism. You might encounter synonymous parallelism, where the second line just beautifully echoes the first to really drive the point home, or antithetical parallelism, which contrasts two different thoughts to show a sharp divide. You know, like a wise son brings joy, but a foolish son brings grief. Then there's synthetic parallelism, which takes a thought and completes it, building this sort of staircase of logic. And finally, chiastic parallelism, which intricately inverts the thought like a mirror, drawing your eye right to the very center of the passage. It is literally all about the rhythm of meaning.
Now, when you find yourself in this poetic, imagery-rich space, you really have to use some sanctified common sense. I mean, if you read figurative language strictly literally, you're going to end up with some absolute absurdities. The text mentioned mountains singing and trees clapping their hands. Or take Jesus calling King Herod a fox. He obviously wasn't saying Herod was literally a small, furry animal. He was using a brilliant, culturally recognizable metaphor to say the man was sly and cunning.
Which brings us to Section 3, the punchline of parables, provocative earthly stories.
This heavy reliance on imagery doesn't stop at poetry. In the Gospels, you might naturally assume parables were just these sweet, simple little illustrations meant for children. Actually, scratch that. Historically, they were highly provocative. They were designed to draw people in and then hit them with something totally unexpected, functioning a lot like a joke with a sharp punchline. And even more fascinating, parables operated on a paradox. They were intended to reveal the secrets of the kingdom to believers who were genuinely seeking, while intentionally concealing those very same truths from hostile, cynical outsiders.
To see how fast this can go off the rails, just look at the early theologian Origen's famous take on the Good Samaritan. He over-allegorized every tiny detail. He claimed the inn represented the church, the beast represented Christ's body. You get the idea. By doing this, he completely missed the central truth and the sharp cultural twist of the story regarding who our neighbors actually are. The golden rule here: don't overcomplicate it. Find the single main punchline the speaker is trying to make.
All right, Section 4, Navigating Prophetic Literature, Covenants and Visions.
This is probably the most heavily misunderstood territory in our entire ancient library. The secret to unlocking prophecy? It's recognizing the massive difference between two words that sound almost identical: forthtelling versus foretelling. The The vast majority of prophecy in these texts was actually forthtelling. The prophets were essentially acting as covenant enforcers for their immediate, contemporary audience. They were calling out current societal sins, demanding justice, and urging immediate repentance. They weren't just gazing into a crystal ball to predict distant, modern events. Their primary audience was the flesh and blood people standing right in front of them.
But there are times when they did predict the future, and when they did, they often experienced what scholars call telescopic projection. Imagine a prophet looking out at a vast mountain range. From where they stand, the near peaks of immediate historical events, like a coming invasion or exile, seem to blend right into the distant peaks of the ultimate messianic kingdom. They see them stacked together in a single unified vision, completely unaware of the massive centuries-long valley of time lying right between those peaks. Because of that compressed telescopic view, the key is to not get totally lost trying to obsessively decode minor confusing details. Instead, zoom out. Ground yourself in the massive, overarching themes. These texts focus heavily on the return of Christ, the ultimate resurrection, and the judgment of humanity. They constantly point toward the final establishment of God's kingdom, the creation of a new heaven and new earth, and the final, decisive defeat of Satan. These 5 themes are the immovable anchors for sure.
Let's dive into Section 5, Apocalyptic Themes and the Rapture, the Catching Away. This seamlessly brings us to apocalyptic literature, a specific, highly symbolic genre of prophecy and a concept that sparks intense, ongoing debate, the rapture, or the catching away of the church. We're going to map this out totally impartially. The theological debate is strictly about the timing around the tribulation, a prophesied period of intense earthly suffering. Does this miraculous gathering of believers happen before the tribulation begins, right in the middle of the chaos, or at the very end when Christ physically returns to earth? Interpretations vary widely based on just how literally readers treat those apocalyptic symbols.
For example, if we look closely at the pre-tribulation view, it's heavily rooted in this concept of imminence, the idea that Christ could return at literally any second, without any preceding historical signs, sparing the church from impending wrath. But listen, regardless of which specific timeline a reader adheres to, the ultimate goal of these texts isn't just to build a complex calendar. The purpose is to motivate believers to live with hope, maintain purity, and exist in a constant state of spiritual readiness.
Finally, Section 6, Common Pitfalls to Avoid. Reading responsibly.
To wrap up our toolkit, we really need some essential guardrails, because getting the genre wrong can lead to some truly wild conclusions. Here is your rapid-fire checklist of pitfalls you definitely want to avoid. First off, absolutely no date setting. History is literally littered with the embarrassment of failed predictions. Second, avoid the trap of literalizing every single symbol in apocalyptic poetry. Third, and this is absolutely crucial, don't try to overread current news events into ancient texts. It is a massive mistake to try and map ancient symbolic dragons or beasts onto today's geopolitical headlines. Always maintain the original historical context.
I want to leave you with a final kind of provocative thought to chew on as we wrap up. When we open these complex ancient books, are we approaching them with the profound humility they require, allowing the text's specific genre to dictate the rules of engagement? Or are we arrogantly forcing our modern 21st century assumptions onto a divine library? It's a question worth asking yourself every single time you turn the page. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.